Welcome back to the show. As you can see, new setups. Is this like a new year, new me type deal?
I feel like we're like a real podcast now.
Ooh, real
we
podcast
got these microphones. It's amazing. I'm glad you're here to set them up because it would take me a couple hours.
I think what I do all the time when I take on new projects in particular is I tell myself I'm going to do it, and I just like wait till an hour before to try it for the first time.
Yep.
And then I'm like, oh, there's like 14 other programs that I need to learn and use before this will actually function.
So I think the next thing we need is maybe a neon sign in back. Right?
Definitely.
And
Yeah, we
maybe
can't stop here.
Some bobbleheads and shit like that up here.
Yep.
That way we can really go with the whole like podcast. And then there's a part of me that kind of wants to approach this as if I'm a sports broadcaster a little bit.
Of course. Do you think the Avenir will just let us build a podcast studio in this room?
Listen, I want the same podcast studio that Rich Eisen has. Okay.
Been a while since we've been here, but today we're switching gears. I think we've done a lot of like in the news. We've done some, what's relevant today. We've done a little bit of a recap of questions that are hot on everybody's minds.
Yep.
Today, conversation is going to be about if you want to get started investing, which I think many people do. They're considering real estate investing in some capacity. Doesn't matter what way, short-term, long-term, co-hosting, whatever it is. I think there's people evaluating it. If you're trying to get involved in real estate investing, what are the 10 tangible steps you can take to get that started? And I think that's what today is going to be about, is going through those steps from both perspectives, the lending and the real estate side, to make sure we're in alignment.
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, just buying real estate alone is investing. Right?
Absolutely.
And it seems to be one that shields yourself from a lot of the other economic stuff that we'll deal with. To dig into that a little bit more so for people who want to buy to invest too, right? Hey, I'm looking at an investment property. Maybe not, hey, I'm buying a property instead of renting, but I'm buying a property solely to make money as well too.
That's right. So there is a key difference there, right? Some people are investing as a part of their purchase, right? Maybe house hacking, where they're buying a residence that they intend to live in, but they are going to rent it out or a portion of it out for some kind of income, right? Sure. And they're technically investors, but I mean, they're also live-in occupants.
Right.
But on paper, when we're talking about a loan, an investor is somebody who's buying a property that they have no intention of living in, that they are going to use in some capacity for either a rental, like profit-making purposes, or potentially to flip, but they just have no intention of making it their residence.
Certainly. And I mean, we get asked this all the time, right? Whether they're looking around online, if they're watching TV, HGTV sparks a lot of light bulbs with people in terms of investing, right? So all too often, we have people question us all the time of when's the right time, how to get into it, what do I need to be cognizant of, right? And, people like yourself and I, we take this stuff for granted because we know what we're doing. We understand the industry. But someone who's just doing their own research online, they could get pointed in the wrong direction, or they could maybe figure out some stuff that may not put them to the point where they can rent as well too, or invest as well too.
100%. And I think actually, that's just a natural lead into where this conversation starts. So number one on our list of the 10 things you should do to get started with investing today, educate yourself.
Yeah.
You really shouldn't do anything, especially with a lot of money, if you're not educated on what you're doing. And I mean, maybe you have a different opinion, but for me, educating myself usually starts with books, podcasts, maybe YouTubes, anywhere where I can find somebody smarter than me, somebody with more experience than me, to share how they got where they got, their experience with the whole thing, and tangible steps on how to get started with investing.
I think that getting, doing your own research is the best place to start, right? I mean, you can kind of hone in on what specific area of investing you want to do, right? It doesn't really necessarily feel like you're being pressured to do anything because you're all doing it online, right? That being said, and we'll get into it as well too, is I don't find there's any better way to do research or to prep other than to talk to a professional as well too.
Oh, well, experience is everything when it comes to investing, right? 100%. And if you can talk with a professional who's been through it, either personally or with clients before, there's really no better way to gauge what you're about to go through than to have that conversation.
Exactly, right? Because outside of that, just as with anything, you got to be careful with what you're reading online.
For sure. Right. Well, and if you are going to do things online, follow things like, podcasts I like. Obviously, one is the Rise in Real Estate podcast. I would just say if you like this, like, subscribe, follow for more. Another one would be like something like Bigger Pockets, or something like, I would say if you're reading, maybe you read something like Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a great book. Or there's something, I believe it's called The Millionaire Investor. That's also a fantastic read. So there are certainly books or podcasts that you could follow that have an abundance of education available for you to educate yourself on pretty much any type of investing at this point. What I would caution against, though, is don't analyze for like 6 years, right? Do 6 months of research and then start diving in, because you'll never get started otherwise.
Figure it out, work up what kind of questions you want to ask someone, right?
Right.
What I oftentimes do too, outside of doing my own research, is I used to like my personal network of people, right? I mean, how many people, family, friends, colleagues do you know that have investment properties right now?
Totally.
Right? Those are great sources of info because they're literally going through it right now.
For sure.
Right? And if you're going to read, how to invest on properties 101, that's going to gear you to how to invest on properties, right? But they're not going to tell you all the bullshit you have to deal with, or all like the nightmares that you're going to have to deal with as well too.
Correct.
Right? So I think using your personal network is another good resource as well too.
The next thing you need to do after you use your personal network, you move beyond, okay, I've talked to people, I have a great idea of what I'm getting into. I do think it's a good idea to practice. So number 2, practice running your numbers. You and I take for granted maybe how often we run comps or look at different numbers for things. So it's easier to look at a property and quickly evaluate sort of a rough value in some capacities, right? Not everybody's used to doing that. And if you're looking at different properties side by side, each one's going to be a different opportunity. So with how things are going, particularly now with the market moving so quickly, I think it's advantageous to practice running numbers so that when you're looking at a property relatively quickly what value you want to offer.
Exactly. And I mean, you can't find a single loan officer that won't run your numbers on an option, on a unit, right? So I think to get an all-encompassing estimate, to let you kind of know where you're getting yourself into, is also the next logical step in what we're talking about, right? Because when you're talking about investing on a property, it all comes down to the numbers, right?
Always. It's
It's all the numbers. So for you to go out and get hot and heavy on a property when you don't even know what the mortgage payment is, I think it's kind of backwards a little bit.
Right. Yeah, you have to, right? You need to understand where you're at. So you're practicing numbers so that you can see what a property would actually cost. And when you're looking at numbers, I'm talking about even beyond the mortgage, right? What is your tax bill? What are your expected utilities costs? Are you going to pay management fees? Do you have local fees for rental? Like whatever it is, you need to take that into account, because you want a rough idea of, okay, properties cost this much in this area, roughly. Step number 3, get in contact with a professional to talk about the lending side of things, right? And I do think that this starts with, you can network locally. I mean, you could do anything from going to meetups to meet a lender who works locally, or trust somebody who's working like yourself, who manages multiple clients across multiple states, so that you can recommend the right product that's needed.
Certainly, because there's an abundance of products out there, especially for people who are looking to invest, right? So, and I'll get into it a little bit in terms of investing as opposed to owner occupancy, but there are going to be different guidelines, there's going to be different rules, there's going to be different regulations, right? But the most important thing to I guess, to recognize or realize when you're investing in a property is it's going to require a larger down payment, right? 20% down you can get away with, but I would highly suggest at least 25% down, right? It's also going to be, we're going to have a little bit higher interest rate on these programs as well, anywhere from a 0.5 point to 0.75 point.
Because it's an investment, correct?
Because it's an investment property. And why that is because these are considered more risky of an investment for the banks or the lenders, right? Say, for instance, if you own a property that you live in and you own a property that you rent out, you run into struggle, you run into a hard time, you lose your job, whatever it may be, which mortgage payment are you staying on top of? The one that you live in, right? So that's kind of the rationale between the interest rates there as well too, okay? But again, a lot of this is geared towards a single unit investment property, okay? Outside of just your single unit condo or family home that you can rent out, we also have to take into consideration multi-units, right? So multi-units are any property that's above 2 to 4 units, okay? Once you get above 4 units, you're talking commercial, okay? Which I don't talk, Right?
Yeah, fair enough. But I do think that, the overall point is have a conversation with lender, and you can have a conversation about both facets. You could say, if I was interested in looking at multi-unit properties, what type of loan could I get?
Right.
If I'm looking at single-family investments, what type of loan can I get?
For sure.
Right? And you can evaluate those side by side so that when you're in the marketplace, what can you afford? Right. And I think, this greater step 3 here is figuring out your team. So your team is the lender who's actually going to give you the financing, and then the agent who's going to help you find the home. So you now know from talking with you what loan products are available, how much can you spend. Now you need to find an agent in the marketplace who's active, who understands investing, because it is a different mindset and it's a different way to run numbers.
100%.
And you want somebody who's going to be able to work with you as an investor, because there's a very different way that investors search. So buyers, when they're active in the marketplace, they see many, they make few offers, they buy one. Investors, when they're active in the marketplace, I know investors that make 100 offers in a week, and they just throw them everywhere, right? And a lot of those offers are very low, and for most owners may even be seen as insulting. But the point of that is that 1 or 2 out of those 100 offers will hit somebody who it does make sense for, and that investor will catch a deal.
It's a numbers game for them.
Right? So as a lender, as an agent, we work with those types of buyers or those types of investors in a different way, because the volume of work they need is much higher, but the success rate is much lower. So we have to balance with them, okay, where are we focused? What are we working on? What are your goals? So it's a challenge for us professionally to keep them in rein on properties that are actually going to make sense for them. And it's a challenge for the investors to work with us so that they understand the numbers and the process.
Well, I would assume at the front end of your process, you're asking them what kind of investing they're doing, right?
Always,
is
right?
Is this a property we're going to be hanging on to and renting out, or is this a property we're going to fix, hang on to for a little bit and flip? I'm assuming the search is going to be dictated by that as well, too.
Well, and you couldn't even have teed it up better if you tried. Step number 4, I do think you have your financing, you know the agent that you're working with that knows the area pretty well. I do think you need to pick your niche, because the agent and the agent you want to work with is great. You have it established, and you're great as a lender because we know that you're established and you're going to be able to provide financing.
Right.
But if we don't know what you're trying to do with that product, it's very difficult for us to guide you. Absolutely. So I do think that, again, number 4 here is you want to be focusing in on what your niche is. Are you going to do multi-unit investing? Is it short-term investing? Is it long-term rentals? Is it flipping? Is it wholesaling? I mean, there's so many different ways that you can get involved in real estate. You got to pick one.
And I think it's worth saying there's no right or wrong answer here. This is a preference thing, right? Some people don't want to be a landlord, right? They want nothing to do with that.
But they don't mind taking on a construction project, right?
Correct.
And so you have to figure that out for yourself. And maybe some of that is who you have access to in your life. Do you know contractors, or are you just trying to be a landlord because maybe management companies?
Right. Or you just you follow this house hacking thing too, right? You want to do that, and hey, listen, I don't mind because I'm going to be living in this property as well too.
Well, and that's important to know, because if you are house hacking, then you were just talking about how you need 20 to 25%. If you're house hacking, now you're a resident, so you only need 3.5 to 5% minimum. So totally changes the down payment expectations when we're talking about these properties, if you're going to live in it or if you're an investor. So when you found your team, who you're going to work with for your loan products and define these properties, then you need to niche down. Figure out what are you focused on, so that we can all be successful together in running the numbers, making sure that it makes sense, getting them an actual negotiated deal, and then closing on the property ultimately, right? I mean, that's the goal.
And you touched on it. Having the team is going to do nothing but streamline this process for you, right? If you're trying to find your lender and then you got to put them with your real estate agent, I mean, it's going to be an extra added step for you in something that already has a plethora of steps.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and so I think now you've got your team, you understand what you're focused in. Now it's a process of running numbers and making offers. And that's step number 5. Run your numbers, make offers. And like we said, investors might make 100 offers before they get one deal on their property, right? Like, depending on your strategy, it might be very difficult to find properties that meet your criteria at the budget you need, particularly now when things are selling at a higher price point.
Right.
So it's going to take time to find properties with me that you can evaluate and make an offer on. And then you need to understand what your numbers are so that you can talk to Derek or your lender and have a conversation about, okay, this is what we're focused on. This is the type of loan product I need.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you know what you're getting yourself into and you're working with a cohesive group, that makes this process a little less daunting right?
For sure.
You know what you're getting yourself into. You know what to expect, and you kind of take out a lot of that unknown, which ultimately results in stress.
Yeah, agreed.
You know?
The more stress you can remove from the process along the way, I think the better served you'll be, particularly as you get started with like tenants in place or anything like that, right? So I would actually, so that's number 6, I would say, and this could have been number 5, they're sort of simultaneous, but number 6, beyond getting your team who's practically going to help you find the investment, get your support system in place to support that investment.
This isn't a process where you close and then find your contractors.
No, you want them to start the day of closing, right after you get the keys.
You want them at your inspection so they know what they need to do to the place, right? And then you have the next couple weeks to figure it out.
So assuming it's going to take work to find a property, I mean, could you get lucky and day one just find a deal? Absolutely. So it does make sense to get this team aligned sooner rather than later.
Yep.
But in the meantime, when you're out here trying to prospect and make 100 offers on properties, you should also be contacting contractors, handyman. If you're going to shop lenders, that would be the time to do it, right?
Yep.
Make sure that you're working with the right team. If you're going to have realtor interviews, that would be the time to do it, to make sure you're with the right team. You don't want to get so far down the pike and then try to make massive change. It's just going to make it so much harder.
The wheels will fall off.
Yeah.
So and I mean, I'm sure you can speak to this more so than I, but contractors are tough to get a hold of right now.
Yeah.
They're very selective with the work that they want to do too. Right. So those that could take advantage of their uncle or their cousin who may have some experience or may actually do that for a job, I think they're setting themselves up a little bit differently as now.
Number 7 is get systems in place. So if you have, let's say, you're working on flipping, you want to have your contractors set up. You want to make sure that if you're going to pay for that out of a business banking account, you've got that account set up with money in it ready to go, right? Yep. You want to have your appraisals, your architects, whoever you need to get involved, you want them aligned in advance. And that would be your systemization of scheduling, right?
Your real estate agent hunting down people to rent it, right? I mean, when you're talking about investing in a property, you're talking about running a business. Right?
It is a business, right?
What successful business do you know doesn't have predetermined or preset processes?
Right.
None of them.
And the other thing is, so let's say you're not flipping, let's say you are going to have a rental, maybe short-term or long-term, you need to have the systems in place for, like, if you're doing a security deposit, do you have a bank account to hold that security deposit? Do you have a process for collecting rent? Do you have the building rules that you can share? Do you have a lease that you can share, right? Have everything ready so that once you own this property, you hit the ground running with trying to find a tenant or get contractors in or whatever it is. You're not trying to put it all together the day of or the day after or a week after, right? When you're losing money.
You're going to do nothing but lose money in that instance, right? And you could very well lose a good candidate as well, too.
Absolutely.
Right? Because, if I was looking at renting a place and the owner just wasn't buttoned up and I was getting piecemealed contracts and stuff like that, I'm out.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
I'm out.
I agree.
Okay. So like this person's supposed to be managing your shelter, right?
That's not working.
They can't put together a contract. Right. So that could scare some people off as well too. And this is a process where you could, I guess change, adjust, update over time as well too.
Right.
Many investors, and we'll touch on it, don't just invest once.
Right.
They invest multiple times.
Well, yeah, and I think that's really what number 8 is on this list. Is number 8 is learn from the experience and make change to adapt. So you're going to have some hiccups that come along, unanticipated costs, whatever it might be that you didn't anticipate with that investment. Learn from that and use it to take forward either in future investments or in how you change the management of that investment. But the worst thing you can do as an investor is to not learn from the errors of your ways and just lose money.
And just constantly lose money, which people do all the time, right? Whether it be they kind of get familiar with some of their processes that may not work or aren't as efficient, and it's just easy to them. Right?
Well, and keep in mind, and maybe if there's one slogan that you can take away from this podcast, and we've said it before, is that you make your money when you buy. So when you're making these investments, the reason we stress making, sure you know how to run the numbers, your financing, it's because you only get one shot to get a deal on this place and to get it under contract and get it done. If you miss that and you made a bad deal somewhere else, like maybe your contractors miss and things take longer than they thought or whatever else, if you got a good deal to start, at least you left yourself some runway for that bad deal not to be extremely detrimental to your bank account, right? So when I think about this, I would say that's critical in the whole process, is just learn from the experience, make sure you're setting yourself up for success, especially if you're going to do this again.
Multiple times, right?
Right.
I mean, because again, like you had mentioned, it's going to do nothing but help you. And then by helping yourself, you're making yourself more money.
Right.
You know?
And not only your experience, but number 9, find a mentor. Some people would argue you don't need mentors in life. It's not a mandatory thing, but I'm such a huge advocate of aligning yourself with somebody who's ahead of you in the journey you want to be on and can teach you something. I think there's so much value in doing that. So if I was going to recommend anything to everyone, I would say align yourself with a mentor who's been through similar experience, hopefully similar investment categories, and is where you want to be a few years down the line, so that you learn from somebody who's gone through some of the challenges ahead of you.
Absolutely. I mean, we do that in our business as well too, right? And there's a lot of people who I've taken a lot of lessons from, but inversely on the other side, there's a lot of people I've taken what to learn not to do from people, right?
Good, bad, ugly, you learn.
Right. So I mean, and most people want to talk about these experiences, right? Because it does nothing but help them, make them better as well too.
Well, and there are free mentors. You can just go to meetups and things and meet people who you trust and value their opinion, and you can try to learn from them and try to offer value to them so that they give you value back. My number 1 tip if you're trying to meet a mentor is bring value to them so that they bring value back to you. You have to give to get. But you can also pay for mentorship. There are plenty of coaching systems available, or masterminds out there, or groups you can join, where there are people who are focused on similar ideas, focused the same direction, and you can find accountability and things to help you grow.
Yeah, there's more than enough professionals out there, right? Like you said, we utilize it all the time. You'd be a fool to not ask for help.
I agree, 100%.
Right.
And and then the last part of this, I think, and this is speaking of being a fool, the way you become a fool with investing is you just stop too soon. Yeah. So number 10 is repeat this process and continue diversifying your investments. Now that goes beyond real estate. You can invest in the stock market, you can invest in REITs, you can invest in whatever you want to invest in. But I do think that it is so beneficial, and the number 1 way to build, incrementally build wealth, generational wealth, is to acquire assets like real estate that give you passive income on top of your day-to-day job so that you can set your family up for success.
I know people making a couple $100,000 a year off just the residuals of their properties right now.
100%, right? Yeah.
And I mean, it boggles my mind, but then when you think about it, once you've done well off the first one, you want to do another one.
Well, and it builds on itself. You hear people say this, like it's hard to make $1 million, but once you do, it's easier to make $10 million. Or it's hard to buy 1 investment property, but once you do, it's easier to buy 10 investment properties. And it's true. Yeah. The reason is, as you start going, you learn from the experience, you have fewer hiccups, you get better at what you're doing, better at your crafts, but you also are gaining assets and gaining income along the way. So that only makes you a bigger, better, more serious investor in the marketplace, right? If you have assets to leverage against future investments, that's how you go from buying, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 single family properties to buying multi-million-dollar investments.
I mean, there used to be a time where investors were beating out everybody,
right?
Because they had the capital to do it, right? How do you get the capital to do it? Invest,
right?
So.
You gotta leverage the assets.
Right. And this shouldn't be one thing that you just do once and you do well and you're like, okay, I'm out. I'm ready. Right?
Yeah.
I get it. If you don't want to, then, and if it was stressful, then don't do it. But
I look at how many people, even if you just want to think about it from the tax benefits, right? If you collect just the income from a great sale, you sit on it, now you got to pay the capital gains.
Right.
The other option is take that income, roll it into your next project, your next investment, multiple investments, and just continue to grow. Take on positive debt, take on positive assets, and continue to grow your portfolio.
I feel like my mom would be terrified of somebody saying positive debt.
Is that a millennial term? It's positive debt.
It's gotta be, right? But no, and I agree with you, right? So I guess that goes into another point is, if you are investing, you might need to step out of your comfort zone,
You're
right?
probably
you
gonna have
might
to.
need to get a little creative and innovative, because you're not going to hit a home run unless you do.
Right. Yeah. Most people don't knock it out of the park in their first investment, but they start somewhere and then they grow from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Outside of that, anecdotally, I will say my favorite product for investment properties, okay, FHA multi-unit.
Oh, such a great deal. So I saw a list the other day, actually, of top 5 multi-unit investment cities in the United States. Chicago was in the top 5. I believe it was number 2, meaning that buying here in a multi-unit situation and then renting out the other units that you don't live in has the highest potential return or the highest potential ability to pay off your mortgage of like any city in America or within the top 5.
Oh, yeah.
And so what you're saying is you can acquire that using as little as 3.5% down, correct?
Correct. So what we touched on earlier, most investment, is 20% down the play,
Right.
if that, right? If you like the idea of a multi-unit and you can stomach paying mortgage insurance, you can get into a 3, 4 flat, 2 flat with as little as 3.5% down.
Right. And with rental rates being as high as they are, even if your monthly payment's a little bit higher with the mortgage insurance than you want, chances are good you can collect pretty well.
You're offsetting it with those investments,
Right.
So there is a negative connotation about FHA, which I understand that it's out there, right? But at the same time, if you can work the product to your benefit, this is the way to do it.
Well, and you don't have to put 3.5% down, right? If you want to put 10 or 15%, just you don't have the traditional 20 to 25, that
Correct.
might be a product that will work for you. The whole point of it is that it allows you to put less down than your traditional 25% investment category loan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in some instances, when some people want to get into an investment property and they don't have the 20% down, this is what I offer up.
Right.
Hey, maybe think about a multi-unit.
Yeah.
And then, you see them start to perk up a little bit. Now, that goes to be saying it has to be owner-occupied, right?
Correct.
You have to live in it.
to live in it.
But again, if you're looking in the same area you want to live at, why not give it a shot?
You know what? As a benefit for everybody watching, in the show notes, we'll go ahead and include a link to the FHA loan limits just so they can see it, because I think that would be beneficial. So.
And I can assure you, I do not have them memorized.
Yeah, and that change all the time.
They don't make it easy on me. It's like 647, 222,
Correct.
30.
For certain-
Yeah,
for certain
yeah,
zip
yeah,
codes.
yeah. Yeah, so we'll put that. I think that would be worth noting.
We'll also link some of the books that were mentioned, some of the podcasts that were mentioned, including this one. Once again, if you like it, like, subscribe, follow. We appreciate any opportunity you have to share this. I think for today, Derek, we've covered really the gambit of how you can get started investing. Any other last-minute thoughts you want to leave everybody with?
Just to reiterate, it seems to be that the planning seems to be the most important part, but also aligning yourselves with professionals, right?
Correct.
And that's obviously where we come in.
Yep. Seek mentorship. Use your experience to learn and plan well, and you should be in a good spot for success.
Sick microphones, all right?
Yeah, the mics are pretty awesome.
Mics are
So
pretty sick.
now let's just see how the audio turned out. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time on the Rise in Real Estate Podcast. Take care.